Okay, so as we're still admitting folks, we'll go ahead and start with the introductions. My name is Barry McKnight with the La Crosse Public Library. It's our privilege to welcome tonight for this Zoom program, Seng Alex Vang. Seng Alex Vang is a lecturer in Asian American Studies for the Department of Anthropology at Fresno State. He also teaches in the Merit Writing Program at the University of California. He completed a bachelor's degree in anthropology from California State University, Stanislaus, and a master's in ethnic studies from the University of California, San Diego. Over the past 10 years, he has taught courses in media representation, food cultures, immigration, and K-12 ethnic studies. He also serves as a managing editor for the Hmong American Experience and social media platform. Welcome, Seng.
Thank you, Barry, for that introduction. And also want to thank the La Crosse Public Library for hosting this event, opportunity for me to talk about this particular issue and in terms of trying to understand what happened with this specific case, right? And so, yeah, so I think that I could just begin with a quick introduction about myself, and because I'm not gonna have a lot of time to go through like some of the specific history about who are Hmong people, why they come to the United States. So it'll just be really general outline about understanding why they came to the United States, right? So I do teach a class called the Hmong American Experience, and so the topic that I'm talking about connects to a particular moment when Hmong came as refugees to the United States in the 1980s, right? And it all connects to a topic about health and mental health issues as well. And so, so I'll go to some of the details about that. And so after I finish talking about the case itself, then we'll definitely have time for questions from the audience, right? And so if you do have a question, we'll save it for the end, and then the moderators will let me know some of the questions that the audience asks about. Okay. All right. So I'll start by sharing my screen, and then I'll talk a little bit myself in terms of my own like history as well. So am I able to share the PowerPoint? Okay.
You should be able to. Yep.
Yeah, I got it. All right. Yeah, so this talk is called Sleep Demons, the Hmong and Nightmare on Elm Street. And I want to thank Gia for suggesting this title for us for the talk, right? And so we'll definitely look at some of the, specifics about this case in terms of, and I think that, recently it has drawn a lot of attention as well. So I'll go through some of that information as well, right? All right. So I just want to begin here with this picture, right? This picture is a photo of a refugee camp, right? And so this is the actual camp that I was born in. And so in Thailand, so after, after the end of the Vietnam War, when the United States left, right? Many Hmong who supported the Americans, supported the CIA, they would have to flee the country of Laos, and they would have to cross the Mekong River into neighboring Thailand, and then they would be placed into the refugee camps that were set up by the United Nations, right? And so this is one of the refugee camps that was set up for Hmong refugees. And so I was born in this exact camp right here. And so you see that, the refugee camp is a place that's surrounded by barbed wire, right? It's a place that's, you're not allowed to leave. And food is rationed, water is rationed for you, right? So it's just not a place that many people would want to be in, right? But again, this is where I was born. And then eventually my family would be sponsored to the United States. So here's like my picture of me. I'm the child to the left, right? And so this is my immediate family. My parents lived in the refugee camp for about 5 years, and I was born there. And then we were able to be sponsored to come to the United States, like many other Hmong refugees and other refugees from Southeast Asia. Um, these are some of the documents that I have for my parents and myself. You know, being a refugee is different from coming as immigrants, right? So most of the Hmong people that came to the United States came under refugee status, right? So this is a political immigrant. People who are refugees, um, they don't have a choice in deciding where they're going to go, right? And so some of the pictures here are some of the documents that my parents needed to be in the refugee camp, and then the other pictures here are transitional photos that, you know, once you are sponsored to come to the United States by an American family or organization, then you would get to take these pictures, right? So most refugees from Southeast Asia, they have similar pictures like this that documents that they have been approved to come to the United States. And these are some other documents that I have in terms of the actual airplane ticket that, you know, my parents when we flew to from Bangkok, Thailand to America, right? So you can see, you kind of make out the details of the flight ticket that, you know, we flew from Thailand to San Francisco, Chicago, and then we will be resettled to our sponsor family in Buffalo, New York, right? And so like many other Hmong families that came during this time, right, they were sponsored by American families, right? And at the time, you know, like the policy to resettle refugees was was based on a dispersal policy, right? So the United States planned to send Hmong and other Southeast Asian refugees to, they sent it to more than 3 dozen states, right? They were resettled in more than 50 different cities, right? And so my family, we were sent to Buffalo, New York, right? And then the other document I put here is that the sponsor family, right? So we were sponsored by the Smith family in New York. And so here you see the documentation that they would agree to be our sponsor to help us once we come to the United States, right? And so many other refugees that left after the end of the Vietnam War, they have these similar documents, right? And so for me, I'm fortunate my parents kept these documents safe for more than the last 40 years. Like they had, you know, these documents are really important to them, right? And so they have preserved them, and we still have these documents as well. Mm. And so, you know, coming to America, right? It was like many other Hmong refugees, it was a cultural shock. So I'll go to some of this through when I look at the case about the sudden unexpected death, right? And so here's a picture of Mr. Smith, where our family. I'm the baby in the blue outfit here, right? And so, you know, we were sponsored by this family to come to New York, right? And like again, like many other refugees families this time, like we were scattered or dispersed across the country, and um, for my parents, it was really isolating to be separated from everything they have known, right? So they would have to come to this country, learn a new language, learn a new culture, and also be separated from relatives and friends, right? And so, like many other refugees, once they were here, they decided that they didn't have to stay with the sponsors, right? And so, like many other refugees, you know, my parents decided to look for places that other part of the country that had refugee communities, right? And so eventually, after a few months living with the Smith family, my family would eventually move to the Twin Cities, right? And then eventually we were for a period of time I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I mean, I never been to La Crosse during that time, but I grew up in Milwaukee. um, um, in the 1990s, the 1980s and 1990s, and then until my family decided to move to California. So I grew up in Milwaukee for a period of time. Okay, so that's just a little bit about myself, and then about my own family, history as refugees coming to the United States, right? You could see the pattern of moving a lot, right? Like again, many other refugees, struggle with poverty during this time, and so for my K-12 experience, it was not really positive because I think, and my family moved around a lot every 2 or 3 years, and so for me, it wasn't really until I went to university that I was at one school for 4 years, right? So I had like I had like a stable learning environment at the university, and during my K-12, my family our family moved around a lot, so I was never at one school for probably more than 2 or 3 years, and so that, I think for me, like that really affected my K-12 experience. It wasn't as positive, um, and again, like a lot of stuff that what I share about my own story with you here. Growing up, I didn't really understand or know that's these story myself, right? And so it wasn't until I went to the university that I got the opportunity to learn about my own history, my own culture, by taking classes that gave me the opportunity um, to learn about myself and also learn about my community, right? Okay, so let me transition a little bit into like the looking at the issue, right? About the sudden unexplained death that affected many Hmong men in the 1980s, right? And so some of you may have seen like the recent episode, right? Like the CW, um, there's the TV show Mysteries Decoded. They had contacted me back in about 2 years ago, back in 2020. Like they had this idea. They had heard about these cases in the 1980s, right? Um, and they wanted to do an episode on this show, right? And so they asked for for my advice about how to get in contact with um, families or relatives of people that were affected by these deaths, right? These mysterious deaths that happened in the 1980s. And I suggested to them that it would not be easy to get to people to talk to you about this, right? Because again, for one, it happened a very long time ago, right? And also, for many families today, like it's something, it's not easy for them to talk about to a stranger, right? That how this affected their family. And so they did spend a lot of time reaching out to people, trying to talk to people that may have been affected by this, right? And so, again, because this is a really sensitive issue for some families because of the trauma and things like that, right? They weren't able to get a lot of feedback from people, right? And I think out of all the people that they reach out to try to talk to, they were only able to get one person to talk about what happened, right? And so this episode aired back in August, and so they did title the episode "Sleep Demons," right? And so if you're interested, you can watch it on the CW TV.com, right? It's free to stream on there. And so they did have this episode there, and I would say that for the first time, for someone that teaches like media representation, and when you talk about issues of representation and in the media, right? And so in terms of this show was the first time that like a paranormal show included Hmong people in the show, right? The focus of the show was about these mysterious deaths that happened in the 1980s. This is the first paranormal show that also talk about refugees, right? Because one of the investigators was a Palestinian refugee, and then myself being a Hmong refugee as well, right? And so this episode, although it's not as great as I expected it to be, right? They did look at some of the issues about what happened, and they did include like actual Hmong people to be part of the show, right? And so I was one of the person that they interviewed for the show, and they also did interview a Hmong woman shaman to come on the show to talk about this issue of sleep paralysis as well, right? And then they did include one of the individuals that they were able to include was Mr. Alex Vu, and he in the 1980s, two of his older brother passed away during their sleep, right? And so he was directly affected by what happened in the 1980s, right? And so his brothers, when they passed away in the 1980s, right, they fit the profile of many of the other Hmong men. They were young, they're in their 20s, right? They weren't known to have any health issues, right? And so they became part of this tragedy, right? Of these 117 men and there was one woman part of this group that passed away, but he lost two brothers during this time who went to sleep and they never woke up again, right? So they were able to to bring him on and to interview him, but as you can see, for those of you who have seen the episode, right, like this, it does bring back a lot of trauma for him to talk about this, and so he was quite emotional in the show, talking about what happened 40 years ago, right, and how he lost two brothers, and so again, this is the reason why not many people were interested or wanted to talk about what happened on TV, right? And so, so again, like the show, they did include a few of us to be interviewed for their episode, right? And so again, and so let me now I'm gonna go through some of the historical context, right? And so this is what I mean by, in the 1980s, as the first large wave of Hmong refugees would come to the United States, right? Um, the, as early as 1977 was the first case that happened where the unexpected death syndrome happened, right? And as that, it started this trend across the country of many other cases happening, right? People weren't able to really explain or understand why this is happening, right? And so there started to be these numerous newspaper articles like this that would talk about this mysterious death syndrome and how it was creating fear in the community, right? Where these men were dying when they went to sleep. Again, right? The profile was that most of them they were not known to have any health issues, but they became part of this statistics that happened, right? So this is an example of some of these newspaper articles that were written about these men dying in their sleep, right? And then like the LA Times also ran several articles about these mysterious deaths affecting Hmong refugees, right? During this time, because um, um, many journalists didn't know, like, who were Hmong people, right? They often referred to Hmong as Laotian refugees. And some of these early articles, they also confused like Hmong refugees being from Cambodia, or they also wrote that, like Hmong refugees were fleeing the killing fields that happened in Cambodia, right? And so this is, some of the, I think at the time, many journalists didn't understand or know about the different ethnic groups that came as refugees from Southeast Asia, right? And so like again, if you come across some of these articles, and even like today, they would still write that Hmong were from Cambodia, right? But again, they were not from Cambodia, right? They were from Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, right? But again, you'll see some of this in written by some of the journalists. And I think that the thing about all these articles being written about, right? I think that again, this would become these stories would become like the inspiration for when film director Wes Craven read about these mysterious deaths of these refugee men that were dying to sleep, right? And so reading all these articles about people dying in the sleep, it gave him the idea to create his horror films a Nightmare on Elm Street, right? So again, like he created the character of Freddie Kruger in these films, where I'm sure most of you have seen and know about, right? But again, like the idea of people dying in their sleep came from all these newspaper articles that were written about these Hmong men that had passed away during when they went to sleep, right? And so that's where he got the idea, and much later he would credit that this is how he came to this idea by reading all these articles during the early 1980s that talked about these mysterious deaths. Okay. So for those that don't know, right, like here, just providing some historical context in terms of what happened, right, and also looking at some of the explanations. Again, like today it's still like a mystery in a way to really um, um, have a conclusion or an agreement of what happened, right? So the historical context here is that during this time, right? 117 Hmong refugees, they died of sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, or SUDS, right? And so all were men except for one individual. One was a woman. Um, the median age of these men was 33, right? So they were very young, and there were some who were in their early 20s, right? Another characteristic of the profile for these men was that they all have been in the United States for less than 2 years, right? And the average time that these men and one woman have been in the United States was 17 months, right? Again, they were all considered to be in good health, um, except for a few, right? But generally, like they weren't known to be sick or ill, right? And the other interesting thing was that the height, that the peak rate of death was occur in 1981 and 1982, right? About 92 um, 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 occurring that year, right? And so for those that know about the migration pattern when Hmong came to the United States, right? The 1980, 81, 82, these were also the peak years that the largest number of Hmong people would come to the United States, right? So in 1980, about 27,000 Hmong refugees were resettled, right? And the following years, 81, 82, were also about 20,000 each. So these were also the peak years that Hmong refugees were coming to the United States. And so again, like this just gives you an idea that the profile of who was affected by SUDS. So at the time, there was a lot of questions, like many medical doctors, many health experts, and many Hmong community leaders as well, right? They had conversations, they had meetings to try to understand what was happening, what was causing these deaths, right? And so one such study was done by Dr. Bruce Bletu. He happens to be the first Hmong American person to complete his PhD in the United States. So at the time, he had already been living in the United States in the late 1970s because he came here as a student during the Vietnam War. So he was studying here, and so this incident became part of his dissertation research, right? So he wrote his book on Hmong sudden unexpected death syndrome, right? And so for his dissertation, he looked at his research sample was 38 Hmong refugees who had died of SUDS, right? And he did in his research, he did look at like 19 who were traditional, who follow the traditional religion and rituals. He also looked at 19 Hmong who had converted to Christianity. And his studies suggest that these people that died due to SUDS, it suggests that there were both traditional and Christian Hmong were under similar stress caused by inability to resolve religious conflict, right? So that's kind of what he did for the study. He also other things that he noted was that more research needed to be done, right? Because when he completed his dissertation, um, this issue was still ongoing, right? And so, in a way, in a lot of ways, like his study was incomplete because he was doing this study as this issue was impacting the community in the early 1980s, and so this became part of his dissertation research. Okay. Another important study that was done on this on the Suds incidents, right, was by Shelley Adler, right? She is uh, she completed her doctorate in folklore and ethnomedicine, right? And so she wrote several articles about what happened. And in 2011, she published her book, Nightmares, Nocebo, and the Mind-Body Connection, right? So some of you may have come across her work, right? And so, because this case was a medical mystery, right? So she wanted to try to understand what was happening, right? And because her training as a in folklore and anthropology, right? She wanted, part of her research um, was that she wanted to try to get answers from the Hmong community, right? So she did her field research in Stockton, California. Um, she conducted in-depth interviews with 118 Hmong men and women um, in the Stockton area. She also um, did a participant observation by observing different rituals and ceremonies that were done by shamans. She visited many community centers, clinics to talk to people, right? And so she was able to talk to a lot of people about what happened. She interviewed them, um, and in terms of her work, she looked at specific um, um, explanations in terms of trying to understand what happened, right? And she asked many of the community members about the Dachua, right? The night terror, um, what we refer to as like the sleep demon, night terror, or the old hag, right? So again, like this some of the connections she noticed that that this idea, right, is not unique to Hmong people, right, or Hmong culture. That it's part of this what we call like the universal nightmare tradition, right? So many cultures have similar concept or about these kind of nightmares that happen, right? And they have different names for it, right? But however, right, like the distinction is that although this exists in many cultures, it did not cause people to die, right? It wasn't used as an explanation why people would die in their sleep unexpectedly, right? And so again, like she asked many community members, like, was there a cultural specific explanation of why this was happening, right? Um, and so through her interview, she was able to kind of ask and learn about the different belief system, um, and also in terms of even among Hmong who have converted to Christianity, like who now follow a different religion, but yet they they were also affected by SUDS as well, right? And so some of the issues that she looked at in terms of trying to understand why this was happening, right, was the cultural reason, and also on the issue of displacement, right? So not just like in terms of displacement coming to the United States, but um, displacement because of the secret war in Laos, right? Becoming refugees, going into the refugee camps in Thailand, and then the next displacement would be coming to a third country, like coming to like the United States, where most of the Hmong refugees came to. Some, in much smaller numbers, went to Australia and France as well, right? So looking at these kind of issues and to see if there was any connection, right, in terms of trying to explain these mysterious deaths, right? And so some of the questions that she asked, community members was that, in terms of in terms of what did they thought about, loss of traditional spiritual ceremonies that, were done by shamans, or could it be like, because they were no longer to practice like proper ancestor rituals, right, for protection, right? Because again, like this concept, right, it occurs in many cultures, and traditionally, Hmong believe in this idea of the Dachua, right? But it never happened to this extent where so many men died due to this, like how when they came to America, right? So again, it's always been part of the cultural belief system, but again, back in Laos or Thailand, right, there was a community support system to, if someone experienced these spiritual attacks, then they may consult a shaman to see what's wrong, right? Or the other belief is that they have protection from the ancestors that would prevent them from experiencing these spiritual attacks, right? So this came out through her interviews. Like many people that she talked to explain um, life, in terms of how this happened in Laos and compared to what was happening in the United States, right? And then the other, in terms of like the displacement issue, right? And so, definitely looking at some of the men, right? One of the question was that, was it due to assimilation pressures, right? That the hardship, the difficulty of many of these men having to adjust to a new way of life in the United States, right? Going through cultural change, having these emotional distress of learning a new language, right? Changing roles within family structure, within a community, right? Where in some of these families, the men were no longer like the head of the household. They were no longer the provider for the family, right? And so these are some of the things that Hmong men experienced in the 1980s as they came to, as they experienced cultural shock, right? In a new country, right? And then the other questions were about, like survival guilt, right? Because many of these men experience seeing death, right? Seeing people that they know, seeing relatives dying during the war, right? So some of the other connection was that, was it, could it be due to the historical or the war trauma that many of these men experienced growing up in Laos, and then also becoming refugees and going to the refugee camps in Thailand. And so at the time that this was happening, many health experts, many medical doctors also tried to look at, medical or health explanations, right? Um, Many of these explanations could not completely answer this question, like why was this happening to this extent, right? So some of the questions that they look at to try to explain this was like, was this like a genetic issue that was unique to Hmong or Asian men, right? Um, they also looked at the issue of, was it like sleep disorders and or other health reasons, right? Also, in Dr. Bledu study, he looked at the question about, was it because these men have been exposed to chemical or toxins, right? In the during the war, or when they came to the United States, right? But again, like the question was like, if 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 it was these explanations, then why were only the men dying, right? Because women also experience sleep paralysis, um, and so if it was just exposure to chemicals or toxins, then why did it only affected the men, right? And so again, these are kind of questions that the experts were talking about, trying to explain this at the time, but it could not fully answer the question why these 117 individuals died in their sleep, right? So again, there was one woman among the group, right? And so like I said, like like most of these explanations cannot explain the full question, right? Again, because only why were only the men dying who experienced like sleep paralysis or were dying due to subs, right? And then I think that because both traditional Hmong men who follow the traditional belief system and Hmong who have converted to Christianity, they were also affected as well too, right? So both traditional and Christian Hmong were affected by SUDS, and so again, like if it's only the cultural belief, right, that these individuals have already converted to a new religion, but it still affected them as well, right? Um, and I think the biggest question is that, by the mid 1980s, right, these mysterious deaths would taper off, and they would stop by the 1980s, right? And so that's, again, that remains to be a mystery. And in addition to that, right, um, because again, like most of the Hmong who came in 1980s were part of the first large wave, right? For those of you who know, like in the 1990s, right, as the official refugee camps were finally closed in Thailand in 1996, 1997, we also saw like a third wave of Hmong refugees coming to the United States, right? And so among these more recent refugees in the 1990s, they did not experience this as well. So they didn't experience these mysterious deaths. And then the last wave of Hmong refugees that came in 2004, right? Because many people were hesitant to come, or they didn't want to come to another country, so they chose to remain in Thailand for decades, right? And so by the early 2000s, the Thai military, the Thai government, was going to repatriate them to Laos if they did not leave, right? So many Hmong had went to the Wat monastery for protection, and so they were able to live there for a period of time, right? But by 2004, the last wave of 12,000 refugees, of Hmong refugees, finally came to the United States, and so these last two waves that came in the 1990s and early 2000s, there weren't these incidents of the mysterious death as well that affected these men, right? So it's kind of interesting to kind of think about that, right? Like these two later waves were not affected in the same way as the first large wave of Hmong that came in the 1980s, right? And so in a way, Al kind of concludes her study by I think I would agree with what she said, that that it's, in a way, like for these men it was unique. Again, like many cultures experience sleep paralysis, or they have different names for this nightmare tradition, right? But the power of the traditional belief in the Dachua, compounded by other factors like the trauma of war, migration, rapid acculturation, and then the inability to practice traditional healing and ritual, right? She believed that this caused catalytic psychological stress that resulted in the death of these 117 individuals, right? So again, most of them were men, except for one woman that died during this time. Okay, so yeah, so I'll stop there in terms of like what I cover about the information about this specific case, right? And again, like it recently, it has got a lot of attention because of the TV episode. There's several podcasts that have talked about this as well, right? Try to investigate and look at these issues, and so it continues to be a mystery. Like, I mean, it's hard to answer exactly what led to this, or why did it stop, right? And then it also didn't affect the later waves that came in the 1990s and in the early 2000s, when the last wave of Hmong refugees came to the United States. They did not experience these mysterious deaths in the same way that the first large wave in the 1980s experienced. Okay, and so yeah, so we can have time for question. I think we have about 20 minutes left, right? And so we definitely have time to address some of the questions that people have, right? I could just kind of begin. Like, people always ask me, have I experienced sleep paralysis myself, right? And then I have, I have experienced it a few times. Um, Specifically, I remember like some of a few times that I experienced it was at a specific location. So in college, I visited a few friends' apartment, right? And that was one of my really vivid moments where I experienced like sleep paralysis, where you're like half awake, you can't move, you feel pressure on your chest, you can't move, right? But I think for me, when I look at that incident, right? I also know that several of my friends who live at that apartment have also experienced sleep paralysis there too. And so I think that in certain cases it could be due to a location, it could be due to something like that, right? And so for me, like again, like people always ask me this question, like, do I experience sleep paralysis? And I say yes, I have experienced it a few times, but in some of these cases that when I do experience it, it's because I'm at a specific location, and then other people that have also experienced it in that apartment. And so so we can open up to questions from the audience or. mm,
Hey, Sang, it's yeah. I'm going to help moderate some of the questions to keep track of them, but um, I wanted to also kind of ask you a couple questions too. I know that like we largely put this on sleep paralysis, right? But in my understanding of it and the way that I've been reading about and seeing it, it feels like it might be something more, something different also, right? I think calling it sleep paralysis is kind of a comfortable way for us to make it make sense. But what if it was something different, right? Because and the logic and why I think this is because this phenomena is really happening in a very closed window, right? Like
mhm,
it's not something that a whole bunch of people were experiencing. We're talking about 118 people within the span of what, 2 years, 3 years,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
I know that you and I have talked, and there's this spiritual belief with shamanism and with Hmong spirituality, where it talks about how the soul becomes disconnected with the body, especially in particular with people who have gone through a great deal of trauma and also being displaced and being moved from place to place. Can you talk a little bit more about this? And can you also talk a little bit more about Hmong beliefs in the spirituality and the soul body connection?
yeah, I mean, from what I understand and know, like that this is very important to in terms of this idea of the soul, right? That if you experience like uh these kind of things, then you have to um consult like a shaman that may be able to help you kind of figure out what's wrong, right? And I think that maybe like during this time, right, of this of being displaced, from Laos to Thailand and then coming to the United States, that I think that in some of these cases, like they weren't able to practice what they traditionally practice, right? So if they did experience these kind of episodes when they were sleeping, um, they may not have been able to find someone to help because they were in separate from family. They weren't in community places, right? So I think that could be part of it, right? And so I think that again, like traditionally, um, um, back in Laos, there, um, through the interviews that Aller did with Hmong individuals, they talked about that community members have experienced this before, right? But they did not die in the same context as coming to the United States. So in terms of this short period of time, having this number of 117 dying within like this 3 4 year period, right, was very specific and unique. It's different from the past because in the past, people may experience it. You would do a healing ceremony to kind of figure out what's wrong, or or and then that person may become better, right? So
Mm,
I think that definitely it was during this specific moment when coming to a new country, having to adjust to so many changes, right? And then again, you mentioned about the like the historical trauma, the war of just seeing people that you love, people you care about, right?
right.
Dying, and many Hmong who became refugees, they had to leave people behind. They could not do proper ceremonies to that they would traditionally do when they were escaping Laos, or
Right.
if they have family members that drowned in the Mekong River, right? They were not able to do their traditional ceremonies to for the spirits of these people, of family members, to send them to like the land of ancestors, right? And so I think that definitely some of this has to do with it, like the survival guilt, right? The emotional distress of assimilation, financial stress as well, coming here, learning English, having to try to find a job, support your family, right? I think again, like what Shelley Adler said was that again, I think it just compound all these issues just compounded, and again, like we didn't see this affect the later waves among refugees. So it
Right.
the yeah.
Yeah. And I agree with all of that. It's there is definitely kind of a spiritual and supernatural aspect to this phenomenon too, right? I mean, what Yi Hyung said is, Hmong people often say that Tuducha can follow you home from other places and that they can cling on you. First of all, for our non-Hmong attendees, can we explain what Dacha is? Because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what that is. And if we can go into it a little further and explain that portion of it too, if you have the answer. Am I breaking up?
So I see that question, and so yeah, I mean, I think that's a belief that traditionally Hmong have, that like a dachua or other spirits can follow you if you call out to them, right? If you so I mean, that is like something that many Hmong people used to believe in strongly, right? And like in Laos and Thailand, where when you go to certain places, like parents and elders will usually tell you like like don't answer if someone calls you, right? Things like that. And so I think that there's definitely that a strong belief that things can follow you, and then if you experience like Dachua or other being at other places, right? There's that belief that spirits can follow you, right? And so if that happens, then again, usually the elders and the shaman would try to do a ceremony to heal, to do spiritual healing, or to send that spirit away, right? Or to hide you from that spirit or something like that. And so that's again, like that's, I think that it used to be a really strong belief for Hmong people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I'm just trying to read other people's questions here. One of the earlier questions, we'll go back to what a couple of people wrote earlier while you were venting. Nuchi Chang says, where are some databases or librarians we can access where we can access these old news articles? Are there other records about the Hmong men or even women and children who passed during the 1980s? That's a good question. I don't know if you necessarily would have the answer to that question. I think that's something that probably Barry might
I
be able
might be able to
have.
answer that a little bit. Of course,
Sure.
Chang may have a reason as well. So I would imagine at your local public libraries often have access to different newspaper archives, newspaper databases. I would check with your local library first, or if you're at a university, that library. Many newspapers around the country have been digitized already, so you can search by keyword and things like that.
And one suggestion for you too, Nucci. It may be hard for you when you do the search to look up Hmong, because back in the 80s, Hmong people were not referred to as Hmong. So that can be a barrier to your search for more information regarding this. So you'll have to look for Laotian or Lao refugees versus looking for Hmong. So that can be a little misleading if you're looking specifically in these databases for Hmong articles. Hopefully that answers your question, Nucci. And then Angela Harding asked, is there any historical record of this happening in Laos before resettlement? So Sang, do you know?
Yeah, so again, like this is a part of the traditional belief system where people can experience the Dachua, right? But again, like it was really unheard of for people to pass away by experiencing that, right?
Yeah.
And so again, like, in Laos, people may experience this. And so if they did experience this, then they again would consult a shaman, and the shaman would, try to figure out or do the healing ceremony, to and then this may not happen again, right? Um, and so it's always been part of the culture, and like what I said, that this is, many other cultures have something similar, experience something similar, different names for it, right? But again, like, people do not die from it. Like in the case of these 117 Hmong men and one of them women that did die in the early 1980s.
Yeah. And then Jate asked, is there any correlation between night terrors and sleep apnea? Is it okay if I answer this one for you,
Yeah,
Sam?
go ahead.
So this is actually more a medical question, and this is something that you can definitely talk to your physician about. Um, can sleep apnea cause night terrors? Sure. Are they hand in hand? No. Night terrors often happen as a result of real life trauma that manifests itself in a subconscious way in your sleep. Sleep apnea with lack of oxygen can definitely kick it off, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one or the other goes together. So that's if you are experiencing sleep apnea and night terrors, that's definitely something to talk to your physician about. But we're not medical experts here, so and our and that's not neither mine or Sang's field of expertise. So I hope that answers your question. And then Mina says, has this phenomenon been observed in other refugee groups? Sang?
Sorry, was that?
Mina asked, has this phenomenon been observed in other refugee groups?
Um, I don't know the exact numbers but then there were some other refugee men that died in the Cambodian community,
Mhm.
that were also, again, like during this time, like, many of the journalists, it's hard to kind of to figure out, because they didn't know the difference between Hmong, Cambodian, or Vietnamese or Lao, right? They just lump everyone together, and so it's kind of hard. But from other studies that have been done, looking at like Filipino men, right, or other Asian men, that there have been cases of other different Asian ethnic groups also dying as well too, right? But again, like it didn't happen in a way that these Hmong men, they die in this short amount of period of time, in the same way. And so they refer to it as like the I think Bugada syndrome, right? It's a medical term to that, again, like, so yeah, so many other people have Asian men have also died similar way, but again, not to this extent, within like a short period of time.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add to that too. I think that Asian cultures in general, with the exception of those who had converted to Christianity and Abrahamic religions, w- all of our religions are heavily loaded in spirituality, right? And a lot of ancestral spirits and a lot of shamanism and beliefs in that were connected to a lot of spirits and whatnot. And I think that one of the biggest cases of this, and you and I didn't actually talk about this much, but Bruce Lee is actually probably the most famous legend that falls into this dying in your sleep thing, because his legend is that his father was cursed by a ancestral spirit who was unhappy with them, and so that's why his father died so young. And it continued with Bruce, and it continued with Bruce's son as well, cursing them to die very early, right? And even the way that Bruce Lee died, I don't remember if he did die in his sleep, but again, it has something to do with the disconnect between the soul and the person, right? And it is a fight that your soul can't win, and therefore your body follows, because the soul can't is not strong enough or is not prepared to take on those spiritual enemies that defeat you when you're unconscious, when you're asleep, right? And so that too could very possibly have something to do with what happened here too. Okay, I'm gonna jump on to the next question. May Lee says, that's true regarding sleep paralysis with the experiences of first generation Hmong and perhaps due to assimilation, PTSD, mental health, etc. But some of our youth who are born here experience that too. Is there a study specifically on it? I'd be very interested to know if such studies did take place and from anyone who's done work in this area culturally or scientifically. So I guess the question she's asking is if any studies have been done on the second and third generations of Hmong youth here who experience.
From what I looked at, I don't know if there's looking at the second generation. The biggest study that I do know is like the UW medicine study that they did look at like 740 Hmong individuals in Wisconsin, right? So they looked at in terms of this issue of the SUDS and so they looked at these data from over 700 people, and the study did say that that Hmong are at risk of experiencing continue to experience like SUDS, right? But although not in terms of experiencing death like in the early 1980s, right? And so I would say that definitely more study is needed to look at the second generation and also like the third generation. Um, but I think like for that question, right? I I think that for um, some of the questions that when the later waves came to the United States, like that was some of the concerns that what if these people they came in the 1990s, right, when the refugee camps were finally closed, and then what about those that came in the early 2000s when Taco Bell was closed as well, right? And so, but again, like these later waves did not experience SUDS in the same way, and there wasn't like death that were um, um, written about in the media in the same way, right? And so I don't know, but definitely more studies needed.
Yeah, I agree. So I think we only have questions for one more, or time for just one more question, unless you can stick around for maybe another 10 minutes. Saying up to you though. I know you have a
Yeah, I could. Yeah, we could do 10 more
busy
minutes.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a really good one from Jasmine, right? Jasmine Langston, I think. She asks, is there a community feeling around Wes Craven using this event within the Hmong community as inspiration? This is actually a really excellent question. And you and I have talked about it a little bit too. But you want to go ahead and go first and comment on that?
So what was the question about?
Is there a community feeling around Wes Craven using this event within the Hmong community as inspiration?
Well, I mean, I think that like again, like many people don't know, right? That this was his inspiration, right? That again, because he read these articles about these men mysteriously dying, right? And I think even himself, because the way that are written about as Laotian men or as from Cambodia during that time, there's a lot of confusion. So I don't think he knew that they were Hmong or he knew what is Hmong, like the Hmong refugees. He probably didn't know about like the historical trauma of the secret war, right? And so because many journalists didn't know about that either, so they didn't write about that. So I think he based it off of what he read in all these articles about these men mysteriously dying. And again, like that was like he incorporated that to his movies. I mean, he created Freddie
Right.
Kruger, but he incorporated the idea about but how dreams can kill people, right? And so again, he got it from reading all these different article about these refugee men. But I don't think he really knew who were Hmong people, Hmong culture. And most of the journalists at the time didn't know about that either. They only saw them as Laotian refugees.
Right. And I'll add a little bit to that too. I think that we have to also look at things within the historical context in which and the cultural sensitivity during the times in which these things happen too, right? Um, so not only were Hmong people being reported on incorrectly, being grouped into one big Southeast Asian pot, but even back then in the 80s and the early 90s, Asian American history wasn't heavily reported on, nor was it public knowledge for that matter. So there was a lot of erasure happening. And so can we put it all on Wes Craven saying that he was culturally insensitive or whatnot? Not really, but it also goes to speak that majority of Hmong people nowadays weren't even aware this happened, right? And that's part of it too, and that's part of the reason why we have so many Hmong participants in this webinar right now too, is because this is a part of hidden history that they were not aware of, right? There wasn't enough study that went into it. There wasn't enough importance that were put onto it. It was at the time, I think it was more like sensationalism and wasn't taken on as credibly and as seriously as it should have been, right? But we're in a different time now, different with a lot different sensitivities, and we have a lot of Hmong scholars now that that provide a lot more amplification for these things, and it is something definitely something that is worthy to as educators and as scholars to go back and look at this and really give it the attention that it needs.
And then just to add to that, like when the episode came out, right, like I saw like family members talk about they never knew that this affected their family until they saw the episode, right?
Yeah.
So the families, in some of the families, they never talked about it to their children or their grandchildren, and so they're only learning about it like today, like 40 years later, that I had a uncle, I had a grandpa that passed away due to this, but we never talked about it, we never learned about it, right? And so I saw some comments like that when the Mysteries Decoded episode came out back in August. Like several people wrote, "Oh, I actually have someone that passed away, but we never knew until now because this episode brought up this issue again."
Yeah. Yeah. And and thank you so much for representing and being on the show and trying to really bring some real knowledge to that show, right? Because that show is mostly sensation, but I felt like you really tried to give it a lot of serious points in there. Okay, I think we only have one more time for one more question. So hey Barry, do you have you want to help me scroll and find a good one and for us to end on?
Sure. Let's see here. There was one. What about the one from, let's see, how does the problem of translation surrounding sons for Hmong folks, for example, the improper translation of the terms, and pardon my, for sleep demons, and even dreams, nightmares, and even the use of images to depict the sleep demon onto that of a white woman, work to racialize Hmong people as exotic? How might does that seem?
Yeah, so saying it's the question at 7:53 p.m. If you want to take a look at it, surrounding
I see it. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think this question, like when this was happening, it was like exoticized, right? And even when you look at like not just about the story, but how Hmong were written when they first came, they were written as like the most primitive group, right? They are written as the most unprepared group, or they were written that this group has some these health issues, and this is why this is happening to them. So definitely they were written as exotic or like what was portrayed on the TV show as well. Like it kind of exoticized these kind of issues. The translation part I'm not too sure about, but I think that when this was happening, right, there weren't as many Hmong people that could translate, right? So I think that when you look at the articles that are written, like journalists will have to rely on children to translate for them, right? Or anyone that could speak English to Hmong will have to translate for them. And so I think that there wasn't enough people that were culturally competent to explain these things to be written accurately. And so I think that's definitely part of in terms of the translation surrounding these different concepts, and they all become the same thing, right? The image, I use that because that was what the cover to Adler's book, right? And so I just decided to use that image for the presentation, but it's her image for her cover for the book. I didn't have an image about that would be different, and so I just decided to use that image from the book.
Yeah, and I'll add on to your comments about translation. Absolutely, we are Hmong people in America as a community. We're at an age and stage in our assimilation process where we have enough people with enough flexibility and fluency in both cultures to be able to go back and correct a lot of these things now, right? Because again, in the 80s, in particular, 70s, 80s, there was a lot of lost in translation, right? When we look at that book, The Spirit Catches You and Then You Fall Down, looking at it now, we can see that there's a lot of things that weren't correct represented in that book, right? Because our generation now, as we become more educated and we can look at things critically, and we can also look at things from both an academic standpoint and as well as from a cultural standpoint, and part of the movement now is to course correct a lot of those texts that may have been written by people who were not Hmong, who were well-meaning at the time, but now that we understand it better, we have to go in and make sure that we correct that so that that is not the perception that is carried on forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for your time. This is really great, and and I appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us. Barry, do you have anything you want to add before we go?
Sure. Just want to also add our thanks as well for presenting tonight. For folks who are wondering and asking about a recording, so this has been recorded. We'll put the title cards on it and everything else, and we'll put it on our library's YouTube channel. So everyone who registered for the talk tonight will get an email with a link to that. You can also search for this La Crosse Public Library and be able to find it on YouTube as well. So thank you very much.
Any final words?
Just thank you for having this event, and then I think it's an issue that's been getting a lot of attention lately, right? Because a lot of people are asking about that, they never knew about this, and so we're learning together about these issues.
Yeah, and I'm gonna boost Sang a little bit too here. If you guys want to follow him, you can absolutely follow Hmong American Experience. He's the managing editor there, and he does great work for the Hmong community. So go ahead and search him out on Facebook and give it a like and a follow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's that listed under if we search though? Is it under American Experience or under your?
Oh, it's just a Hmong American Experience.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks, folks.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.